Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time, with the one and only Matt Meuli every Wednesday during what we call Matt Chats, which is our open office hours and our Ask Me Anything, AMA, Ask Matt Anything show that we do to talk about shields and succession specifically. And this one is also being replayed across our podcast network because the content and the topic is, I think, a universal challenge that a lot of people who have built their wealth through small business have today. So, Matt, welcome back to another Wednesday. It's a beautiful day there in Colorado, I assume.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's nice to be here. And yes, it is another beautiful day with, possibility of record high temperatures. So, the world's
And
getting
then
hotter.
and there's always the possibility that 10 minutes later it could be hailing in 38 degrees, right? So that's the beautiful thing is if you don't like the weather in Colorado, you just wait about 15 minutes.
Yep. Both Colorado and Wyoming, you need to have an extra coat in the car and make sure that you always have the ability to layer your clothing.
Well, and as it relates to weather, so weathering the storms, that's a really bad segue, but I'm in my dad joke mode because I'm around you. So today we're going to focus on specifically as it relates to shields and succession. We're going to be talking directly to that person, that family whose net worth is the majority of it is probably tied up in a closely held small business. And to really segment this, not because it's in any way the upper bound or the lower bound, but just because this tends to be the sweet spot of both our readers, our listeners, and the people that we look to serve. We're talking about a business that does somewhere, around 2 million a year in revenue and maybe up to 10 million a year. Obviously, you could be north of that, you could be slightly below that. All of this is relevant to you either way. But what some of these data points are important to grok before we get into the audience questions that came in off several posts that I want to have you answer for us is there's a magnitude of this wave that is real, right? So if you look at SBA data or a thing called project equity, we'll put these in the show notes. The magnitude of that wave is 2.3 million. That's the total number of businesses that are boomer owned. That's been categorized by people 62 and older. So that might be a late Xer, but they categorize it as boomer owned. Will face an ownership transition in the next 5 years. So we're in 2026. Between now and 2031, think about that. This could affect, according to Project Equity, 24.7 million jobs and represents 5 trillion in annual GDP. That's not small. Now, if you look at the band that we talked about, that $2 to $10 million revenue business, there's no specific granular data that I could find on any of the sites or any of the AI engines that broke out that segment. However, when you look at the rest of the data, what it did tell me and what AI was helpful with was it said a couple things. Roughly 1 in 3 businesses owned by someone over 50 cannot find a buyer today. There's a lot of reasons why that is. We'll get into some of what those are. And so they'll be either into a forced closure or a fire sale scenario. The age profile, over half the US businesses are already owned by people over 55, with over 23% of them being owned by people over 65. So a quarter of the small businesses in this country almost are owned by people 65 and up, and more than half, right around 52%, are owned by people 55 and up. And they represent, in that $2 to $10 million revenue band, they represent millions of jobs and millions of businesses as an aggregate basis. So this conversation that we're having is directly affecting a couple million people, whether they are planned for it or not. So that's why I'm excited to have it with you. We'll probably have this over the next couple AMAs because there's a lot to talk about. But those are some of the stats. Now, there's all kinds of other downstream effects to that we want to get into, and people's questions have been around, right? So is there an exit plan? Is there a succession plan? Is there a retirement plan? Because not everybody wants to have it end when they die, right? They might want a life after building this. What is the structure of communication? What are the documentations on when there'll be a change of control and when the patriarch or matriarch who's been powering this thing will transition out? Who's going to take over? Will it be family member? Will it be a third party? Will it be an ESOP? Will it be a manager buyout? Those are the kind of questions that came in, Matt. So I hope you're ready. Opening thoughts on that. I'll let you kind of ground us in, some of the things that you want to focus on, and then I will get right into the audience questions and we'll start to attack them. Thanks for being here, guys. Those in the live room, please share the link and add to it. Those listening on replay, feel free to restack. Matt will let you do that. I'll do the quick commercial so that everybody knows who they can call and where to call. After that, we have to do a disclaimer. I'll let you do the disclaimer.
Okay, so yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll do this disclaimer here. So I am an attorney, but I may not be your attorney. And I'm only your attorney if you actually engage with me and sign on the dotted line that you want to hire me. A lot of things we'll be talking about today are not really legally related. They're more what we call certified exit planning advisor related. That is one of my designations, as well as I am a CEPA, a certified exit planning advisor. So a lot of these things will be, based on that. And again, it's most of these talks just come up with my opinion and my feelings about, what's going on and what I've seen, with people who do have businesses who haven't done very well and passing them on and have died, and the fire sales that happen because of that. And why I think this is a really important question, and glad that we're getting into it, even though it's not as much of the legal stuff, although legal, attorneys are always involved in some of these sales and things like that. But why I'm happy that we're doing this is that, a lot of these business owners, you give those stats, 67%, or one out of three, whatever, 33% aren't going to be able to find a buyer. The real important thing with all this wealth that you manage is for a lot of these small business owners, their entire, not maybe not their entire, but 70% or more of their wealth is that business. Because if you're a business owner, you don't really have a lot of IRAs and things like that. Why? You're taking all your profits and you're putting them back in your business to grow. So if you don't have a buyer or a way to exit that business, a lot of that wealth is just going to evaporate because that's what you have. And it's not only for the people you love if you're passing it, upon your death, but it's also, how are you going to take care of yourself in retirement if you can't get the majority of your wealth out of your business so that you can do that? And that's kind of the fundamental things that I hope we discuss today.
Yeah, I that's a really good point because I've seen stats as high, and again, 70 is probably, I think the right number low end. I've seen stats as high as 85% of a small business owner's net worth is tied up in their illiquid small business. And again, most of these small businesses, as you and I have talked about, these things are thriving in the sense of a lifestyle, right? They if you're a 2 to $10 million business, you might be taking home before taxes, right? 4 to 500 to $1 million plus a year. And if you've been doing that for any length of time, you have accumulated assets. A lot of those assets might be in your personal name. A lot of those assets may not be structured. We talked about those different things at length. So there's a lot to unpack here about how to basically protect the assets you have been able to accumulate. But what we're going to focus on today is the one that's kind of the elephant in the room for a lot of folks, which is what is the plan for this main asset? Whether it's a practice area, because it could be a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer, it could be any of those things. What is the transition plan? And especially when you look at the data that says 52% of all of these businesses, regardless of the industry, are owned by people 55 and up, you can understand why 1 in 3 have a trouble finding a buyer because private equity doesn't want to buy stuff that's so small that they don't have anything. And if 52% of the people are the same age as you and I, they're not looking to go buy something when they're trying to retire, right? So your pool of potential people that even want the thing is heavily skewed into your own demographic. So anyway, these are just some of the forces to be aware of. And again, what we're here to do is help you prepare in advance and help to think about the questions that you don't have a lot of time to, because like most of us who are running small businesses or empires, whatever, you're working on the thing, you're or in the thing. You're not really working on it all the time. And
Right.
and when you're working in it, there's just only so many hours in the day. So we
Yeah.
emphasize on that. And yeah, go ahead.
Just a clarification on that, you may be taking home the 450, 500,000 and things like that. A lot of times small business owners end up having the business pay for a lot of their personal expenses and things like that. But, there's a lot of perks of the business where you're actually not taking home that much money,
Right.
because, it helps with, um,
Taxes and right,
yeah,
bonus depreciation.
helps
We all know all the tricks and we use them, but the point is
with.
that
But if you don't
lifestyle.
think about it, Chris, if you don't look at it from that way, you may look at your business and say, well, it's only barely covering my expenses, because it's paying, you're just not watching it close enough. And so right from the get go, you may not even think your business has a value. because, who else would work for not taking a salary and paying all their employees and that kind of thing? Well, what you're not thinking is that your business is paying for a lot of things to keep you alive and do those things for you. Your business is also supplying a lot of social interaction and things like that that you're not thinking about. But if you don't start thinking about it, you'll just say, well, my business has no value. And when you pass away, you're done. And that is this exit strategy. It's not a good one, but an exit strategy that people talk about is, dying at their desk. That's that's where they're going to be, and then that's when it quits. So, I'm not saying that's a good one. I don't advocate it, but it is a strategy. So, I think the main thing is just the awareness of, hey, my business could have value, and if I work at it in making it have value, it could have even more.
Yeah, and I think there's also the value that is non-financial, which we've talked about. We probably won't get into today, but maybe a future episode we'll dive into that, is the meaning, right? The emotional value of the work, right? And part of understanding, okay, let's assume you get on the other side of this perfectly successfully financially, you got it all, right? The 40K a month that you were running through the business and this and that and the other thing, and only really taking home whatever the legal amount was for taxes, you've now offset that because you had an exit value, and now you have that in the market's earning you 5%, and your dividend is paying you exactly what you had. So your lifestyle had changed. Assume you nail it and your kids have whatever they need. And now, okay, you got 10, 20, 30 years left, hopefully healthy. What are you going to do to create and replace the meaning that you built for 40 years by having a place to show up, having people to lead, having customers to talk to, whatever? That gap becomes a second piece of this.
Mhm.
And we can't even get to that piece until we know that this piece has been handled. So again, we can understand and empathize with why people avoid doing this, why they have this conversation for another day, why they put it off. We're here to do these AMAs to let you know there's questions that are coming in from all of you that we do want to address. Maybe it's a catalyst for you to start to chunk this down because you don't have to do it all at once, but you should start, right? So again, now the room's filled up, we're going to do a quick disclaimer, just so everybody knows. Again, Matt's not your attorney unless he already is. If you want to talk to an attorney or if you want to talk with him, there's two numbers you can call in Colorado: 970-820-0090. You'll get a human during business hours. If you don't call during business hours, leave a message. A human will call you back. That's how that works. That's cool. If you live in all 50 states and territories and you're looking for asset protection stuff, and some of the Wyoming structures, call that number, 307-463-3600. Same rules apply. A human will call or a human will call you back. Or you can check them out at yourtrustedplanner.com. And because we're talking about small business, I'm going to do this ad insert real quick just because I use these guys. This is Chris's recommendation. Matt's evaluating them, so this is that. But I really love Pebble because they make my life easier. And when you're talking about things that are in your business versus on your business, one of the things to do as part of your succession plan is figure out what is our core? What do we have to do? What do we have to own? And then what can we outsource or what can we leverage other people's infrastructure around compliance for? And for me, HR is not something I want to spend my time doing, but it's something I need to do. And so when it comes to hiring abroad or remotely or paying people in their local currencies or keeping my tax nexus where I want it to be, but being able to hire the best people wherever they are, I lean on a company called Pebble. They're an employer of record, PEBL. They operate in 185 countries. And essentially, it allows me and it allows my succession plan to know that the HR function of my business, we talked about millions of people are employed by these small businesses, a third of which don't have a buyer, which means if they don't find a buyer and they shut down, a third of those people employed by those businesses might not have a job in that local economy anymore. There's all kinds of things. So to create stability up front and easy transition, as well as a clean set of books that are fully compliant, where I don't have to worry about state law, federal law, HR crap, workers' comp, I use Pebble for $3.99 a month, which is what I pay, not what you're going to pay. I'm happy. You can get a deal. Go to highpebble.ai, HIPEBL.ai. They have a special deal. I think it's 25% off right now. If you're interested, you can take a look at it. They're a great brand partner. They're a subscriber to the channel. We appreciate them. All right. That's the ad. Now we're back into the content. Let's get to question number one. Family business reality check. All right. This one's about siblings. So we'll just start with that. We'll jump around. All right, Matt. If one child is stepping in to run the business and the others are not involved, doesn't say how many. So you can pick 2, 3, whatever, but one child's going to take over. Sounds like. What's the cleanest way to structure ownership and economics? Two questions. So this doesn't turn into a future family fight or lawsuit.
Okay, well, yeah, and that's the big thing is, do your kids really want to take over? And we're just assuming that they do want to take over in this case. You look out at the industry and like 50% of these owners, these 65 and above owners would love to have their family take over. And when you look at reality, probably closer to 30% of that happens, because the kids don't want to do it and everything. And that's where you need to start with is the kids. Actually, the very first step is what you should do is figure out how much is this business worth. Because if it's not worth anything, if it dies when you die, you're probably going through a lot of brain damage that doesn't matter. I mean, there's nothing to equalize. There's nothing to set up there. But if you do have a valuation, and when you're starting this, you should probably get an evaluation of how much your business is worth. You now have something where maybe you can equalize it, and you want to equalize it between the non-business children early on in the process. You have a valuation, maybe you have life insurance, maybe you have other assets that you can give the other kids so that when mom and dad die or when you take over, you have a value of, hey, everyone was treated equally. And the reason you want to do that is because if the one child that takes over is really a good business person and really works hard and puts in the sweat equity, the 80 hours a week and everything, all of a sudden this business is worth a lot more a couple years down the road. And the non-business children are looking at this saying, wow, mom and dad loved you best. They left you $2 million where they only gave us 500,000 each. Well, that could have been where it was when the value was there. So it's very important to have that value put in there and try to get everyone equalized from the start. And then the business person can say, hey, you got the same amount of value. You could have invested it and made the same amount of money, but you went and bought a Ferrari, whatever. Unfortunately, we can never keep people from suing. If they want to sue, they can sue, even if they don't have a very good reason. But that's usually where it starts, is that the perceived value gets skewed because of the hard work of one of the kids.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think again, I think that's an important piece. I want to talk to you about where you think, and again, none of these are solicited. So if Matt has an opinion that someone he's worked with, if I say one, it's who I've worked with. None of this stuff is ad driven. So um, I'm not sure which third party valuation tools you would recommend as a starting place. I'll let you kind of speak to that in a second. One of the things I'll say as it relates to this question to validate the point you just made is perceived value versus actual value versus market value. They're all different things, right? And I'll use a use case. If I grew up in a family that owned, I was just down at a lounge that I hang out with every once in a while when I'm looking to just kind of have some alone time, but be around single serving friends that are kind of cool, right? Seeing. So I was hanging out at this cigar lounge the other day and just kind of watching the World Cup and having a conversation with the owner. And it's a family run place. They have two or three across the coast here from Santa Barbara on up. And and I asked them how long they'd owned it and was whatever it was, 20 years, 30 years, right? And I said, there's not a lot of these in town. And the thing came down to you can't get a liquor license, right? So inside of the county, the way California works, a lot of places are like this. They issue a certain number of, call it, beer, wine, and liquor licenses based on the population growth. And so if that population growth is not growing, then they don't issue more, right? So that doesn't mean that everyone with a license has an operating business. To your point, is the business even worth anything? The example she gave me blew me away because years ago when I was looking at an investment in this space 20 some odd years ago, I remember that there was this place that had gone bankrupt in San Diego and the license for whatever, the alcohol, whatever that was, right,
Mhm,
was kind
mhm.
of about 50, right? That's what it was worth. That's not what it cost if you went and you could get a new one, but that's what it was worth because you couldn't go get a new one. She told me that the going rate today, like if she shut her place down and she only had beer and wine, so she didn't even have hard alcohol. But if she shut her place down and BK'd the rest of the business, the going rate for that license is four to $500,000.
Yeah.
That's just so someone could decide to open up an actual place. Now I say that because it's kind of a perfect example of, is the thing even worth anything? Well, the business may be generating 2 million a year and throwing off $400,000 in revenue. So you could put a number on that and say, well, 4 to 7 times EBITDA is whatever, 2.8 million. 1 times revenue is whatever. You could put a valuation on that. It might be right, but it means that you have to keep hiring people, you have to keep buying inventory, you have to keep selling stuff, you have to keep paying taxes. If you bankrupted the thing or shut it down, just wound it down, and you held on to this license, which because no one ever gets rid of their license, and you just sat on it, then that's worth potentially 4 to 500,000. Doesn't mean it's liquid tomorrow without a fire sale. It just means that that asset is there as a kind of a book value asset. If you're the kid who grew up in that and you saw your parents just entertaining people and they were going on vacations and they were buying cars and SUVs and writing them off, your perceived value might be 5 million because you grew up in a lifestyle that was privileged and you attach that to this business in your mind. And so you have three different valuation models, all of which from their own perspective could be right, none of which are accurate. And that is number one. You have to kind of understand what is it worth and in what condition. Like, in other words, what's it worth if we operate it as a going concern? What's it worth if we sell it to a third party? What's it worth if we wind it down and divest the assets?
Yes. No, and that's, I mean, and that's just assuming you can sit on that license if it's not part of the bankruptcy or whatever. It's not an asset that's going to be taken.
Well, I say bankrupt meaning like wind it down. You wouldn't
Yeah.
bankrupt. Let's say you liquidated. Liquidate would be a better term, right? Because assuming you just said the owner died at their desk and now nobody wants to operate the thing because maybe no one likes to smoke, right? That's why I use the cigar lounge. It's like not everybody
Yeah.
likes that, right? So kids may not believe in it. They may think, "Ah, I don't like it. Dad likes smoking. I hate it. I think it's bad for the environment, bad for people. I don't want to own that business." That's more common than
Yeah.
not. So they go, "What do we do?" Right?
Well, I like your,
And
your illustration using that of perceived value and everything like that. But let's even take a step backwards here and just, ask the question of you may be a solo business person, you may have, a couple employees, whatever, but who are the shareholders of that business? I mean, who are the, stockholders, for lack of a better term, but who are the shareholders of that business? And if you look at it, it's your family. Your family is like your board of directors, they're your shareholders. They may not be in the business, but like you said, they could be seeing the lifestyle and all these other things, but they're involved. And every time that you decide to not, take money and put it back in the business, you have decided not to put that money in your family. Every time you decide to work late and work in the business, you decided not to spend that time with your family. So they're the shareholders. Those are the ones that are actually giving up everything, hoping for a return, whether it's an emotional conversation or even the money that the business is making. They're the ones that are basically the people that you're working for. And so to not include them, if you have a couple kids that wanna work, a couple kids don't wanna work, but not to not include them in the discussion of where the business is heading, what it's all about, and that kinda thing is like not telling your shareholders that you're gonna make a big move. And, in the corporate world, that's
actually,
the
a,
shareholder
it's actually a
takeover.
really good point. It's a really good point because small businesses like the fact that they're small because they don't have a lot of the rigor of being public or what have you. However, it doesn't mean that you don't have shareholders. And and more importantly, your shareholders may not even think of themselves that way, but they emotionalize it that way.
Yeah,
And you just
they're getting
made a really good
the
point.
stress. When you come home stressed, they see, well, I don't wanna have anything with this business because all they're doing is stress. They may not see the good things, but the fact is they are invested heavily in your business because your money, your time, your emotions, you can either give them to the business or give them to your family. So that is the biggest thing. It dovetails into what we were talking about earlier on these podcasts, these Matt chats, about how you need to talk to your parents about, what they've done for passing their money down. Well, equally, the parents need to talk to the kids and what they think about the business and, if they're even interested in it, and to have these conversations and not because I'm asking you to, it's because they're invested in your success and your failure. And I don't know, dare I say you owe it to your investors to give them an annual report?
Well, and they also they may be some of them in this case, right back to this question, it says one child is stepping in. So that implies maybe it's not true, but the way I'm implying that is somebody's raised their hand and said, I have a vision for this. I kind of want to be the next generation of it, right? Someone in the family tree. The rest of them are passively invested, much like many people are in the S&P, right? They hope it goes up. They want it to keep going up. They expect it to go up, but they don't really want to know why and how, right?
Mhm.
And so the conversation with some might be shorter, but the point is the respect to give. your shareholders, passive or active, should be there. Because even if you didn't ask them, and because you probably didn't ask them because they were probably children, you were doing this for them in your mind. I know I do it for my family and my kids, but that doesn't mean they get that. That doesn't mean they agreed. That means they didn't have a choice and they kind of grew up in a family that owned a small business and that's all they know. So they may not even think of themselves as shareholders, but this is an opportunity to have that conversation and level set everybody on, are you a shareholder? And then it becomes less emotional because you can say things like, would you like to exit your position at some point as a shareholder, or would you like to stay long?
Mhm. And within the same family, Chris, you can have one who wants to take it, as their career for the rest of their life, where the other 2 may have been working in the business because mom and dad asked them to, and they don't mind it, but their entire thought is, "I wanna be here until I make enough money to move to another country, and live my dream and be on ship," and everything like that. Both of them wanna be in the business, but 2 different outcomes. One wants to use it as their springboard to get to their life earlier, where the other one enjoys doing the work and wants to come through that. And a lot of you just have to ask them, and a lot of the resources that we try to bring on the table, to do these things when they happen is in the certified exit planning world, there are family counselors, family therapists, those kind of folks that you can bring in for the sole purpose of asking these people and coming up with a report of what does each child, what does each family member want to get out of this exit plan, just so you have a common base so you can you can start making these things. And that's, when you talked about fair not being equal or whatever, it may not be money. Everybody may not want the money, so the money may not be equal, but what they wanna get out of it, their goals, you can try to get everyone's goals in there and come up with a plan to do that, and that's critical, when you're trying to have, folks take over. You just don't leave it to chance, just don't, assume that your kids are gonna wanna work the same way you do. Just between the generations X and Gen Z and all those folks, some people think it's normal to work 60 hours a week. Other people are just working to invest. And, there's different reasons why you go to work just because of different ages as well. So until
Mhm.
everyone on the same page, it's really difficult to come up with a succession plan just in principle, the assumptions. We all make models in our head and we all have our own assumptions. And that's why a lot of times we don't connect mentally is because I'm assuming a different set of facts than you are when we're talking about the same thing.
Well, and I like, I want to frame this the way you've framed the other conversations related to trusts, wills, estate planning, things like that, which is you either have a succession plan or somebody has one for you. Like there is no world where there's not succession. At some point, I'm not going to be here. At some point, you're not going to be here. Hopefully, in a very long time. At some point, I won't be able to work or won't want to work. I don't know when that'll be. Hopefully, in a very long time. But guaranteed, there will be a time where none of us are working, none of us are owning. We will be not doing that anymore. And so, succeeding us, whoever gets that asset, whatever that asset's worth or not, is inevitable. The plan around what that looks like is ours to design or ours to accept based on the statutes, based on somebody else's plan, based on someone else's opportunism, or based on just the inertia, right? And so I think it's always important to frame like you have a plan, whether you know what that plan is or not, whether you designed it or not. This is your chance to be more thoughtful about it and to enroll those who you care most about in it.
Correct, and someone, it just came to me that we're always, thinking about here, in the West, we're really think water rights are really, really important that we have around here, and I'm just thinking of all the, cities outside of our area that have, bought the water rights of farms and things like that. If you think of a farm as a business, there wasn't a real plan, there wasn't a succession plan, so the farm just got sold, and what happens is other cities that need the water come in, they buy the property, strip off the water rights, and then they sell the property back to, developers and things like that who don't need the water, and that all of a sudden, all the county water is going downstream, if you will, um, and it's no longer available for the community to use. So, that just shows how a community can suffer because there wasn't a plan in place. The bigger cities that are buying the water, they have a plan in place and they're thriving because they're getting what they need to thrive. Where these little farms that are going out of business is basically hurting the community because no one is thinking about the whole big picture and the plan there. Probably a bad
Yeah.
example. That's what's
No, I
currently
think it's
going
actually, I
on.
think it's a very timely one. I mean, we had, the farm CPA on Atomic Level several episodes back. He's consistently in the top 15 of writers on Substack in finance. And Paul talked a lot about the present state of the value of farms, the transaction level of farms, the family dynamics of these farms and this acreage in a very similar way, but very focused on that. So, you can check that episode out. But I do think farms are a perfect example because, again, somebody might not consider that as a business. So what I heard, step one is, what's the thing worth in what context? If we were to really simplify this, like before you can even start this, obviously everything starts with a conversation. Everything starts hopefully from a place of how can I help, right? How can the boomer help their Gen X kids understand their piece and their desires for this or not? How can the Gen X kids proactively help mom and dad figure out how to do this without feeling like you're telling them how to run their thing that they're still in charge of, right? So, how to help is always what you say. What's it worth and in what context? Because you should have somebody look at that. So, start with your own conversation, but also look for third party tools that can help you understand the potential valuation of your business based on its location, its size, its revenues, its EBITDA, its assets, whatever they may or may not be, rights, deals, things like that, and look at it through the lens of liquidation, look at it through the lens of third party sale, look at it through the lens of a management buyout, whether that management buyout is from your own child or someone else, and look at it through the lens of an ESOP, right? We'll do maybe a whole show on ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. Like, because if you have employees that are younger and they love this thing, want to keep it local, you don't have to exit to your children. You could structure it where over time in a gradual way, you could sell that business to the people that work for it.
With tax
And
benefits.
there's a lot of tax benefits to that too. So there's a lot of options there. But before you even get to which ones are right for you, you have to understand what is the thing worth in context. A question in
Mhm.
the thread I think is also relevant is another checkbox, right? Just like see if you think this is in the top five. Another thing is just how's it structured, right? So in other words, does it being an LLC or an S corp or a C corp, does it change anything in this part of the conversation, or is it just something that you should understand?
So yes, how it's owned can change the conversation because when you're looking at buying something, you can buy the ownership, which is a certain thing, or you can buy the assets of the business and not really transfer the
Mhm.
ownership kinda thing, and there's different tax implications for both of them. If you're buying equipment and things like that, you have stuff to depreciate, you have expenses, so it makes it easier on the buyer, makes it easier on the seller if they just step out of the business and sell all the goodwill and the stock and everything in there. So that does play into the effect of how it's structured, a little bit, but more than that, it's the structure that kind of builds in the systems that you need to make a business more valuable. If you're doing everything by yourself, like you mentioned a little bit earlier about the HR piece and all those other things, if you are the business and you haven't shown anybody else how to do that part of the business and something happens to you, your business shuts down. No one can continue it on. If you have an S corp or a corporation or something like that, you now have shares, you have stock, you have ways to share the business without building those in for like an ESOP program or something like that. So it does matter, but it's even more um, fundamental than that. It's finding how much it's worth. There's a lot of business valuators out there that can come in and they have different ways of determining different models of determining how much your business is worth. But what I'm talking about is getting a benchmark to see if it's worth anything. And the reason we look at that, Chris, is a lot of times since that is the main asset or 70% of the asset, that is probably the only thing that can fund a retirement plan. And I don't mean an IRA or I don't mean anything. I mean a lifestyle, retirement lifestyle. And like you said, some of us are retiring at 65, 70, and still have another 30 years, still have another major chapter of our life left. We may be retired longer than we were working. I mean, that's a possibility. So, that's the second part of this. When you get the valuation, is you got to figure out what that plan is. Why do you go to work? What do you need to substitute? Can you play golf 10 hours a day? Is that going to be enough? Or do you need to volunteer? Do you need to get a part time job and do something? I know for myself, I'm a musician. I get on the stage a lot. I like to get on stage and perform. I'd probably be doing more performances. Maybe I want to learn piano. Well, I'd have to get piano lessons. Maybe I need to buy a piano. That's a completely different expense and expenditure than what my business is. So, if I don't have that plan in the back of my mind, I used to play tennis as a kid. Maybe I want to get into pickleball. Well, if I get into pickleball, I'm going to have to probably join some place, and have a monthly expense to be a member. Those are the kind of things that it's really important in my mind is to sit down and come up with that plan. And if you can figure out that plan, you figure out how much you need to fund that plan. You then look at how much you have in the bank. You look at how much you're going to get from, even if Social Security or whatever is still around. You look at the income you have now and what you need to do that lifestyle. And that gap is what you need the business to fill. And so if it's here, when you get the evaluation, you now know that you have some work to do to get it to here. And that's when you can start coming up with a plan on getting the business to fill the gap. But until you know what that gap is, or even know if that business has any value or could have more value, you need to have those plans and know what the money is now, know what that floor is and where you need to get for the ceiling.
Yeah, I want to focus a little bit on that because I think a lot of times people don't think about the earnout option or the seller carryback option as the best way to transition out of a business. So having that plan in place then allows you to kind of understand your lifestyle needs for your retirement, not a retirement plan as a vehicle. And a lump sum may not be as good as a continued check in a phased out transition.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So you just need to know. I mean, if you're what 120,000 short a year that you need, and you only going to think you can get it invested at 3%, you're going to need $4 million to fill that gap. So there's ways to kind of back into what you need, but the main thing is to figure out what is that lifestyle you're trying to fulfill. What are you gonna be doing? What are you gonna be teaching? Are you be running a Bible study or something to keep that human contact or things like that? Because the sad thing is when people retire, they don't have anything to do. They don't have anything to fulfill those needs that were being filled. A lot of them end up passing away really close to the retirement. They just don't have a purpose for going on, and that's sad. And we don't want that to happen. But coming up with that value that you need, you can then work that in your business. And a lot of folks will tell you if you have at least 5 years before you want to exit, you got some time to maybe put in some systems to get some of the knowledge out of your head and to other people and to make that business have more of a value when you need it to happen. But I would just let everyone know I think the first two steps is coming up with that retirement lifestyle and the current valuation of your business so that at least you know where you are, you have the blueprint, and now you can work for the plan.
So let's talk about how they could professionalize it and prepare it for a transition because a lot of times maybe this is not as far as professional. It's kind of been more ad hoc on a desk, on notebooks, on whatever simple LLC structure or not. How can they think about professionalizing it so they have optionality?
S So a lot of it is just, once the gap there is working with, like, someone, an exit planner or an attorney or an accountant or something to come up with ways to make your business, more valuable. And again, it's not as, difficult when you're talking about it. I mean, it's more difficult in practice, put these things in place, but it's not as difficult when you're talking about it. Is a lot of times you just need someone else to know how to do the books. You need someone else to know how to do the things that a business person does. A business person has so many hats that they wear, Chris. I mean, it's just incredible if you're just the only person. You're the salesperson, you're the marketing person, you're the one that comes up with all the systems and the contracts, and you're the one that comes up with all the procedures to run the business. You're also the one that looks at all the metrics, all the numbers that come in so that you can make good decisions day by day. So you're collecting all these metrics. You're the IT person, right? Human resources. You're taking care of all the people, and you're taking care of all the plant, which could be the businesses or the building or everything in that. You're trying to do it all, and if you're not sharing that, or you don't have another trusted person who can help with that, that's all in your head, and it's going to stop when you stop. So that no one else is going to know how to do that. So at the very least, I mean, you could do is start. Uh, just kind of brainstorming here. You could just start recording what you're doing in each of the positions. Hey, now I'm doing payroll and this is what I'm doing. I'm going here, I'm going here, I'm going here. Get somebody from a local college or a local community college or even high school to transcribe that for you, or have AI start transcribing it so you
I
can
was
get
just
some.
gonna say one of the best strategies would be to, whether you get them at a college or what have you, you have a whole generation of kids who are wondering what the future of work looks like. Some of them are proactive, some of them are more scared, doesn't matter, but there's some talented, hungry young person in your market that could be interested as a shadow. And if they know how to use things like Obsidian and OpenClaw or whatever, you could literally just have them shadow you around and try and figure out how they would duplicate you in a company owned brain. And if you spent the next year doing that, you're not talking about putting in the frontier models. You're talking about just someone who knows a little bit, who's hungry, who can look at you and go, "How would I replace this person?" But without the pressure of replacing you. That's a great place to start to professionalize the knowledge graph of your business.
Right, and filming it as well. I mean, sometimes you may wanna film your sales process, so that it could be a training film. We're talking a lot, with some of the handymen, the plumbers, the electricians, and things like that. When they go out on a call, they're always complaining they don't have anyone else who can help. Well, maybe they need to video what they're doing and kind of talk someone through. Well, first, when I'm working on the HVAC system, I look at this, I take this piece off, I make sure it's not clogged. Just run through the steps so you can start documenting what you do. The main thing, we call this human capital in the business. The main thing is just getting it out of your head so other people know how to do it. Okay. And that's when a business starts having value. It has to be repeatable by another person doing it. There has to be uh, a procedure so that somebody else can pick it up and learn how to do it and take it on and continue when you're gone. Because the reason why your business has value is you have a service other people are willing to pay for. And if you can't give that service, you can't give that payment. And so another person is not going to buy that business. They're going to do what you were saying. They're going to come in and maybe buy part of the business, but the deal is going to be you got to stay. So now instead of making 100% of the profit, you're making 30% because you sold 70% of it. And, that is an exit plan, but that's one where you're going to need to stay and maybe they'll have you train somebody over the next 5 years or something like that. There's a lot of ways to work these deals, but the idea is if you have it all in your knowledge and you're not sharing it or getting it out there, if it's all in your head, you really don't have a
You
value.
know, it makes me think about one of the other things when you think about professionalizing a business. Some people are familiar with the SBA, some people aren't. Most people think the SBA is there so that you can buy a business if you're using like one of their programs, like the 504 loan or whatever it is, right? The reality is it's there to help you sell your business more than it is to help someone buy your business. And I say that because if you can get pre-qualified for SBA underneath their loan limits, let's say you're trying to sell the business for under $10 million, right? I think the loan limit just got raised, but last time I looked, I think on that program they made it $5 million, right? And they require roughly 10% down by the buyer. Well, the other portion of that could be a seller carryback. It just has to take a secondary position to the senior note of the SBA, and it has to be on similar terms. So, for instance, if you have a 10-year amortized loan with SBA, you'd have to put the seller carryback on some kind of 8 to 10 year horizon at an interest rate. But that's where you could bake in that retirement income. Because again, if you have a business that's throwing off 200,000-300,000 a year, it'd be very hard for you to get 10 times EBITDA if it was a small local business and you didn't have a lot of unique value prop, right? Which would mean you get the $3 to $4 million you need to get that 120. But if you have a business that's throwing off that same EBITDA and you take a seller carryback note and you can pay yourself between you sticking around and doing some chairman emeritus work or whatever, right? And you getting that loan payment, you can cobble together 10 grand a month. Well, now you just guaranteed yourself 8 to 10 with a secondary position, So you're collateralizing your business, but you're getting a cash flow of 10 grand a month. And you're getting that today, and you've just freed up 70, 80% of your week for whatever it is you want to do. And yet on the buy side, if I come and I look at your business and it's pre-qualified SBA and I'm looking at using SBA paper, I'm more likely to buy yours than the other three that are in the same category that are not pre-qualified SBA. So some of the professionalization you could do that's simple is just look at what does it take to get my business SBA pre-qualified, right? Because it's if you were to list it for sale, it becomes a marketing attractive device for someone who's looking to buy your business with a little cash out and some combination of seller carryback and SBA funding. And
Right.
so it becomes another way to go through the rigor of it, but have a very specific end game in mind of why it's going to benefit you from potentially finding new eyeballs for your business. So just another thought of mine of how you could think about professionalizing it if you were looking at it as a asset purchase or as a business going concern purchase, because it could be either. It
Yeah, and
doesn't
there
have
could
to
be
be one.
real estate involved as well, Chris. I mean, if you own the building and things like that, you have another layer that you can do where you can sell the business portion of it, the clients and the contracts and all that kind of thing, the procedures, the procedure manuals, the uh, client relation management software, all those kind of things. But you can keep the business and or keep the real estate and then have the buyer uh, pay you rent over the time as part of your retirement plan. On that first example, when we were talking about if you have some kids who don't want to be in the business and other kids that do want to be in the business, I mean, that's one of the equalizers there too, is to go ahead and have the one child get the business, but they're paying rent because the other couple kids get, the building. And so now there's an income stream that goes along with it. I mean, that's
I'm actually trying because that segues to the other question. So back to some of the estate stuff. So pre-sale estate planning moves before getting putting it on the market for third party sale. What estate planning moves do you think? This is the question. What estate planning moves should happen first that most owners miss? And maybe use that use case you just gave, because I think that's actually a really common one where there's a business and there's probably a hard asset that business lives within that was accumulated over time. And now there's, let's say, multiple successors, two, three, whatever. Some are going to stay, some are not. You have this optionality. What pre estate planning moves, as you're thinking about this transition over the next 3 to 5 years of the business ownership, do most people miss? Because they probably do certain things consistently right, but what are the ones that they miss that they shouldn't?
The missing thing is kind of the succession plan within whatever governing document that sets it up, whether, it's bylaws and corporate resolutions if you have a corporation, or an operating agreement if you have a limited liability company or something like that. But it's in the transfer section of those is how do you transfer these things? But even more importantly is who takes over when the owner becomes incapacitated. And so, from state planning's point of view, you need to have some powers of attorney in place so that someone can step in and help wind down the business, get refunds back to the customers and, make it look, have the business wind down in orderly fashion so that it's just not chaos and there's not creditors coming out of the woodwork and things like that. So a good agent would be in there. It doesn't have to be your normal agent. I mean, you can do what's called a specific power of attorney, special power of attorney, just giving someone the right to run the business. They don't have any rights over any of your other assets or anything like that. But to have those in place, and even when you're going on a long trip, you finally take the plunge and say, I'm going to leave my business for a while and, someone else is going to run it. You probably should have those things in place. Who's going to sign checks and things like that. For attorneys, we have special trust accounts and only attorneys can write checks on those accounts. So you just can't have any power of attorney do that. You have to think it through and get that set up. A trustee, if the trust owns the business, a trustee can help you with that. Again, they're constrained by what the governing documents say. But a lot of these small business people, they don't even have a operating agreement or articles of incorporation. They've gone on the Secretary of State website and they've just paid the money and opened the business, but do
Yeah,
not
or
have.
they hired, they use LegalZoom and they use some local equivalent and they filed it and it's in a drawer somewhere and
Or the bankers got
it
it.
was
No
touched.
one knows
They
who
may
has
not
it.
even sign. They may not have even assigned the operating agreement, let alone held minutes or annual shareholder meetings. Because again, as a family-owned business, you're like, we talk at dinner. We don't need to do that. And
Right.
these are not uncommon, so you shouldn't feel like stupid. There's no the value in that. But understand that when you're professionalizing this thing, those are some of the checks and balances that both from an asset protection standpoint, but also from a timeline standpoint matter, because that was one of the other questions is like gradual versus phase. Like, when should I start this? Obviously, sooner rather than later. But, timing matters, because let's just say that all of those things were sitting in one entity: the real estate, the operating business, the IP, all that stuff. We talked about this in length on some other shows about asset protection and the Wyoming stuff specifically last week. But just keeping it simple, I now realize I'm going to kind of divide up these assets, right? Somebody's going to take the business as a going concern, someone's going to take the real estate, right? Whether they're family or not. And I kind of know that's the path. Maybe the employers are going to have some ownership. Now I have to start to transfer some of these assets out, but there's tax implications, there's planning around that, because again, if I sell it, depending on the state and whatever, there's going to be a transaction that gets documented at par value today, or at value today, not at the par value of when I bought the thing. Taxes, property taxes. So part of this becomes, how do I structure some of these assets so that they move into containers where I don't have necessarily a taxable event, but I have the ability to transfer the asset or the control of that asset, more importantly, to certain members of the family or third parties without an unintended tax consequence or burden. And when I do that, if something happens over here, someone buys a business, sues me later for misrepresentation, how it doesn't claw back the thing that I moved out of that business whenever I moved it out. Talk to me through how you help people plan and even address some of those concerns.
Well, yeah, I mean, the plan is the key word there. You gotta have time to plan. If you don't have time, it's emergency situation. You're gonna lose value. You're just trying to get out of it to clean up a mess, pass that mess on to someone else. They're not gonna pay as much for a mess as they would for an orderly transition. So when you talk to a lot of these people who are coaching you or helping you through the exit planning process, they like to get 5 years, 3 to 5 years to think about it. And just to put it in the simplest terms, uh, what you can do during that 5 years is just shore up your business. So if you think about, how much you would pay for a business, think if you put your buyer hat on. If they're got a net income, whatever that is, but they got a net income that's relatively stable year after year after year, the buyer says, "Well, how much would I pay for that net income? How much times that net income would I pay?" We call that a multiplier, but, maybe it's only 1 times the net income. I'm only willing to do that, or 2 times or something like that, but it's gonna be pretty low multiplier. It could be, half. But this is what I'm willing to pay because this is what the business makes. Well, that's where you start at. That's why I say you get that valuation at the first time to see maybe what that multiplier might be. And then by automating your business, making it easier to run, making it so you can have more capacity come through, making it so more people know what you do, that may move from just a simple, 1 multiplier to maybe a 5 multiplier. Now you're just more like other businesses like you. And then there may be a best in class multiplier. But what you're doing over that 5 years is you're putting systems in place in your business to raise that multiplier. So now someone can say, okay, it's the same um, net income, but it's worth 5 times or 10 times instead of 1 time because this is run so much better. It's best in class. They got the top technology, they got the top people. They got all their major clients or customers under contract. So they're not gonna flee when I buy the business because we have a contract and things like that. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build value. And as you do that and become more orderly, you're getting more of those contracts in place so that those clawbacks that you're talking about isn't gonna happen because now we have a contract saying the building is in another LLC and it's not part of the business, so it's not part of the sale, and I'm not representing it as part of the sale. And the nice thing about having those 5 years, Chris, is that when you get to the end of the 5 years, you may have done so many things to your business that is so much more fun to run because it's not all relying on you. Maybe you get a few days off, you may not want to sell at that point. You may want to wait till a future time because you may just be having fun at that point. And that's kind of where we try to get people that I talk to is like, let's work because we want to, not because we feel like we have to, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
that's a simplistic way to look at it. But it's increasing that value by increasing the systems in your business to make that multiplier larger.
Yeah, I think there's a couple catalysts here that I want to give people. We talked a lot about kind of advice for the sell side, which I think is, very important. Because like we said, the numbers are there, they're real. We're talking about millions of companies employing millions of people just in that 2 to $10 million annualized revenue range, closely held businesses. We're talking about 24.7 million jobs, $5 trillion in the economy. If we talk about stuff that creeps towards $30 million in revenue, right? So we're talking about a significant portion of the economy that doesn't, and one third of which can't find a buyer. So the sell side's important. Interestingly enough, though, being ready. So if let's say I have my timeline, I'm going to put that persona on. I have my timeline that, hey, in year, 6, I'd like to be on the golf course or whatever my thing is, right? And I want to be earning what I'm earning right now, and I want to be out of the day to day. So there's this 5-year kind of window where I could start making moves today, thinking about 6 years. Then there's when the market wants to buy me. And I don't control that, meaning it might take me 2, 3 years to find a buyer from year 6 for the business. Or 6 months from now, someone might come to me and say, you're an electrician, you're in a market, you've got a trusted brand for 30 years, and I have a contract with data centers and I need a guy locally. And I know you do residential, but I have a vision. So I'm going to pay you X. And I wasn't thinking about what my business was worth, but here somebody comes and they want to pay me something I have to entertain, and I'm not prepared. I can't even conversate yet but I might lose that opportunity. So the point is, being ready never hurts you. So if you're thinking about the buy side is now being flooded with YouTube videos saying human businesses are the future in a world of AI. I don't disagree with that thesis. Local, I think all of us would rather eat, if we're going to spend the same $30 for a hamburger, I think we'd rather eat from a guy who shares our zip code than from a corporate chain. I think most of us feel that way. Doesn't mean we won't do it. Just means if given the choice, there's this premium now put on human experiences, local customer experience, things that small businesses typically pride themselves on. And so if that trend continues, you have a whole generation of young people in their 20s and their 30s raising families that are not retiring and that are trying to figure out, where am I going to make my money? And small business ownership is less risky, even though the stats are still high, than starting something new. So if I can kind of find a passion and I can go latch onto a brand that has local gravitas for 30 years, and I can hang my license as a dentist, as a lawyer, as a doctor underneath a firm that's been around for 30 years in Fort Collins or in San Luis Obispo or in whatever town you live in. And you go, that's interesting. I want to buy one of those. Or I'd like to invest in one of those and kind of earn somebody out like Matt. I want to own that thing. You have buy side pressure and interest right now that is coming, looking for a ready to be deal done seller. So even if you're not sure if your kids want it, the time to have this conversation, time to start professionalizing it now, because the buy side, in my opinion, is only going to get more of an appetite. And so this bridge between preparedness and market appetite is a big gap right now. And that's what we're trying to help you solve with these question and answers and in open office hours, because you crossing that bridge is predicated on how prepared and how documented and how dialed in you are. And then you can capitalize on the opportunity in either timeline, yours or maybe someone else's, that doesn't hurt you.
Yeah. No, absolutely correct. And you just need to be prepared. You need to know the numbers. If you're making 20 to 25% growth in a year, there's going to be somebody who wants to buy you. And especially if you're systematized and they don't have to relearn everything. There's other people who want to stay in the business who can help do those parts of the business that the buyer doesn't want to do. There's going to be a market, right? And they're going to be ready to go. And the trick is just taking it from, okay, I'm doing everything myself, into getting it where the human capital, the social capitals we'll talk about on another mat chat. How you build those and get those other people, the things that make your business valuable. But if your bottom line is your 15 to 30% growth, there's a lot of private equity money that wants to come off the sideline to snatch that up. They're not going to want to. They're not going to want to run your business. They're just going to want to help share with the profits. But there's still a market.
Well, and that's the other thing is I think things like ESOPs or things like, seller carrybacks to next
Management buyout,
generation heirs.
manager buyout. Yep.
Yeah, I think those are gonna be more and more, common. There's always a place and a space for the private equity upside. I think when we're talking about this lower end of 2 to 10 to 2 to 15 to 2 to $20 million a year businesses, there's a gap in between that, meaning there's a buyer that buys it between 2 to 10 and grows it with the intent that when it's at 50, either as part of a combination or something else they're doing, they will flip that to private equity, which again is a whole other angle. Most of the people that I think we're trying to help and focus on right now don't care about that and probably aren't going to be bought by private equity. However, now with the tools, with the ability to use AI to help you systematize this for pennies on the dollar, just by having someone follow you around and capture you and then say, what do I do with this? How would I turn this into SOPs? How would I turn this into an operating manual? How would I, right? Like you can now do that kind of work for $20 a month on a frontier plan or on a local model that's open source. And you could have somebody just document you. And now that thing that was always so intimidating about how do I get all this knowledge for 35 years of how I do this out of my head and then the training, like now that's not as intimidating and you can start to make real progress. The sake of all of this is so that you can have a plan that works for you. And I think you hit it on the head earlier. I want to finish on that point. It's really a conversation with yourself and then those shareholders that you care about, the family members or whoever is on that cap table, passively or actively, documented or undocumented, and say, here's what I'd like for my golden years. I'm not sure what you'd like for the business and this asset that we've built. And so, in order for me to get what I want to know what you want or expect out of this business. And we need to have that conversation. And then you can start to figure out what it's worth in what context. Then you can start to figure out how you could arrive there because selling it is not the only option. There could be a lot of different ways to do it. And then you could also provide a chance for meaning for yourself as well as the next generation, whether they're your kids or someone else's kids looking to buy something awesome that's local to a town they love and want to work in. And so anyway, thanks for this one. We'll have to pick this conversation up. Keep sending in questions, guys. We want to personalize this as much as you. So if you have questions about your own business, if you have scenarios you want us to run, if you have questions about how it impacts the state plan, especially around asset protection, send them in. We'll get to them next week and the week after. We'll keep this kind of small business theme around shields and succession because I think there's a lot to unpack here. So Matt, thanks for being here once again. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're listening on replay, thanks again, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Chris.